Well, there's only one more month until Brick Fair, which means it's really time to focus on this MOC and get a lot of progress done. Well, in this episode, we'll be pretty much completely finishing the right side of this MOC, but the right side of the capital and the terrain will pretty much be completely done. So let's get into this episode of Building RYLOTH. So to start off, I want to finish off the portion of the wall that I began to experiment with in the previous episode. The top will slope downwards, and to get this angle, I'm using 1x1 cheese slopes and using a half plate offset to make sure that they all line up perfectly. And of course, this portion of the wall will be sitting at an angle, so I've used some cheese girder slopes at the top of the sloped portion, and that's able to attach to the top with just some bars and clips. But the side is lined with panels so that it can angle next to the tower. And now you may have noticed that the terrain is sort of built up against the walls of the Capitol in the episode. I wanted to experiment with the design for that, especially since it will be difficult to build at that angle. So I came up with this design that I am considering just making all in tones of green. And I'm using these 2x4 wedge plates. They are a similar angle to the cheese girder slopes that I'm using. It's not exact, but it is quite a close angle, so it should allow for minimal gaps. There aren't really many other options, especially in olive green, so I think this is the best choice. But this piece of terrain is also attached at an angle using bars and clips, and I think it gives an effective look. Now I want to revisit the weird sloped arch thing. I'm still not really sure what it's supposed to be, but I have the proof of concept that I designed previously, and I've added some texture to the sides by mixing plates in with the tiles. This design is very easily extended, but I did run out of some certain light gray tiles that I need to finish off the sides. I do end up receiving more later in the episode, but right now I just have to live with some substitutions. The top is able to attach very easily, and I've added 2 jumper plates, which will be how this thing is attached to the rest of the wall. And even with this attached, I still don't really know what it's supposed to be. Who knows, maybe it's a slide for the battle droids to ride into battle with.
All units, charge!
Now when it comes to this portion of the wall, we're going to go back to a 90-degree angle. First, I was just going in to figure out where it was going to sit in the final position. I am just having to kind of squish this portion of the wall because I really do want to include one of the larger buildings on either side. This wall really should be longer. It should probably go up to about here if it was kind of being in accurate proportions. But I do want to add that building because I want to include the prison block room from the Bad Batch episode. So I went ahead and began building up the next portion of the wall. I thought this would be a good little chance to answer a quick question. So Cabbage, just Cabbage, that's a fantastic name, by the way. So they ask, do you play any Star Wars games, and if so, what are your favorite? Now there are a lot of Star Wars games I absolutely love. You know, Jedi Fallen Order and Survivor are fantastic games. The Battlefront games, specifically both of the Battlefront 2s, are my favorite out of those. Of course, the Lego Star Wars games, obviously, but if I had to pick one, I think it's going to be Republic Commando. I love the gameplay of that game. I love the squad mechanics. It was really the first project that established unique personalities among clone troopers. You know, each member of Delta Squad is really unique, and I really love that. But that is a game that desperately needs a sequel or a remaster. Honestly, at this point, I will take anything, especially after how dirty they did my boy Scorch in the Bad Batch. Probably my favorite character from the game, and they did nothing with him throughout the entire show. But back to working on the wall, I've redesigned the angled terrain bit, so now it's just sand and olive green, but I want to add a little something extra because what I have now is just not really doing it for me. I had actually brainstormed adding some vines to the bottom of the Capitol walls when I was planning for this build, so I thought it'd be good to go in and give that a shot. But I think adding the vines really helps with the transition, but it is a shame that there aren't many pieces in sand green that will really work well for this. So I'm left just using leaves for the sand green vines, but with that in place, I also edited the previous buildup of terrain so that it is all green now and now has some vines as well. But moving on to the final portion of the wall, I wanted to build this in 3 separate portions that can come apart so that when I add the prison room, I can easily remove it. But I once again continue adding a little bit of terrain buildup and vines to the bottom of the wall, and I went ahead and built up to the point where the prison room will reside. So when designing the prison block, I looked back at the Bad Batch episode and I noticed that there was a sort of tile pattern in the middle of the floor. So I tried my best to replicate a similar tiled look, utilizing a bunch of quarter circle tiles in order to create a pattern which I've just copied multiple times for the floor. But the walls of the prison are curved, so I'm using these arches which have a similar curve, but I don't have many in dark bluish gray, and we will just have to live with a colorful prison for now. For the interior of the prison cells, I did my best to be accurate to what we can see, so I added a little bench and the vertical Imperial-esque lights. One of the cells will be open and the other will be ray shielded, so I'm using a bunch of transparent red pieces and I will light it up in the end with some sort of flickering lights added to it. The doorways are another place that I need to purchase pieces for. I'm going to be using a different piece for the outer edge of the doorway that will look a lot nicer. I've added a single overhead light onto the ceiling of each of the cells, and those attach right onto the doorway. When When figuring out a way to thread a light through the ceiling of the prison, I used a pretty interesting connection. This is accomplished by shoving a stud in between 4 quarter circle tiles. It surprisingly stays in place. It's not the strongest connection, but it does stay in place. Since the stud has a hole in it, I can thread a light through the ceiling and attach the final piece of the prison. Now I do want to experiment with some figure placement for the prison, and I thought, well, the separatists would probably have some clone prisoners at this moment in time, so I threw in a couple of clones which are currently bald, but don't worry, he will have hair later. I also threw in a couple of security battle droids, and as you know from the last Q&A, I love Republic Commando, so I went ahead and threw in Delta Squad as well. I imagine they are on a mission to free the clone prisoner. I really want to include them in this mock. So there is just one last remaining portion of this building to work on, and that's just the very top of it. I'm using the same technique of mixing together plates and tiles to add texture, and that was done because I needed this part to line up with the rest of the wall. It would have been half a plate off if I was just stacking bricks together. There's also this dark gray detail at the very top, which I've also included in other parts of the wall. Definitely helps in making this part of the wall look more than just a big gray rectangle, but it still kind of looks like it. But that's the wall done, and I wanted to see what it would look like to have some clone troopers scaling the wall, which I've mentioned in the previous episode that was something that I really wanted to include. So there are a couple of clones climbing up the wall, with one being shot down by a few of the droids at the top of the wall who are firing down at the enemy. But I definitely think that this looks sick, and I really want to include it in the final display. But with the wall finally done, let's get back to some terrain work as well as more questions for this video. So Crafter's Forge asks, how do you afford parts for your mock? And this is a very interesting question as well, because there really is no secret. I mean, I have a job and most of that money goes back into this channel, which is really my main hobby at the moment. Something I would recommend though is that if you're buying parts, don't buy them all from Bricklink or all from the online pick-a-brick service, since some of the prices might be cheaper on one or the other. Now it does take time to do this process, but I ultimately think it's worth it because over time you do really save a lot of money. I still believe that the pick-a-brick system in Lego stores is probably the cheapest option, but you know, you have to have very specific circumstances for it to work, because one, you need to have a Lego store near you, and two, you also have to get lucky with the pieces that they have available. But if you have a low budget or none at all for a mock, I would recommend by basing what you build on your current parts collection, and then slowly over time making small purchases to build your collection as your budget gets larger. I mean, when I began, I was building a lot of small mocks with the parts I have. I didn't make a Bricklink order for at least a year or two after I started. But if you have questions for the next episode, leave it in the comments and include the hashtag Q&A with your question. I should be able to answer a lot more questions in the next episode. So there was a sale going on the Brick Vault website, and if you don't know who they are, they sell custom Lego instructions. I already built their custom AAT for this mock. I purchased their instructions for the STAP speeders. Since we see those around the Capitol in the episode, thought they would be a nice addition to the mock. I've used some clear stands to attach them to the Capitol and create a very nice flying formation. And these instructions were also bundled with your Droideka instructions, so I'll definitely have to build those for this mock. But I also went ahead and built 2 more blurgs. I built a black one, which belongs to the leader of the Freedom Fighters, Cham Syndulla. This is supposed to have some white markings on its head, but I couldn't quite figure out a good way to show that. And I also went ahead and built another light gray blurg. And here is your reminder that these are designed by me, and you can purchase the instructions on my Rebrickable page, which is linked in the description of the video. But that does bring our total up to 4 blurgs, which I do think is where we are going to stop. I did want to let you know that the next episode is probably going to be 3 weeks instead of 2 weeks from now, just because I'm going to be going on vacation next week and I won't be able to make any progress, which technically means I have 3 weeks, not a month, like I said in the beginning of the episode. Building the rest of the Capitol walls shouldn't take more than a week. To terrain really shouldn't take more than that either, which leaves me with a week left to do miscellaneous things, so I think it'll be plenty of time. But yeah, I better get back to building because I'm running out of time. So thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.